This is our next Lunch and Learn, which is celebrating Zero Waste Week, which is this week. So we've got Joe Dwyer from UHBW with us today. So Joe is the Senior Sustainable Waste Manager at UHBW and that leads our sustainable waste work stream, working towards our ICS Green Plan. So I'll hand over to Joe to start his presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Megan. Thank you for inviting me to this. I have attended most of them, and I think they are really useful. So I have the opportunity now to talk to everyone about waste and learn around the zero waste possible. As a waste manager, of course, I'm going to say yes. I'm very confident it is. But before we get there, so this is some members of our team. Megan touched around the work streams. So we have NBT and UHBW working together to achieve our sustainable objectives. Climate crisis. So as you may know, is one of the biggest catastrophes of our time is climate change, which is unfolding ever faster than we anticipated. Climate change will have disastrous effects on every region of the world. Environmental deterioration, natural disasters, meteorological extremes, food and water insecurities, but also will have a big impact on healthcare systems, including our healthcare system. So while only accounting for 5% of carbon emissions alongside water, based on 2020-2021 NHS ERIC data, on average 156,000 tons of clinical waste were produced in secondary care alone. That's a lot of waste. It is estimated that the carbon impact of this waste is approximately 100,000 tons of CO2 per year. That's a lot, and if you can imagine, this is just secondary care. So if we include also primary that is produced within the healthcare systems. Can you still listen, hearing me? Yep.
You just cut out for a few minutes, but I can hear you now.
Oh, brilliant. Sorry.
Just a second. Sorry.
So healthcare waste relationships. So as you can see on a Venn diagram, displays most of the waste streams that is produced within healthcare settings. Um, and this sounds and looks really complicated, but it isn't. As long as we deliver good education and supportive measures, we can definitely reduce and lose a lot of our waste. So within healthcare, we have what we call the HTM 701, which is Safe and Sustainable Management of Healthcare Waste. It covers a range of waste streams produced directly within and through our healthcare activities, and provides practical advice on all those that manage healthcare waste from the point of production to the point of disposal and prevention as well. So early this year, the NHS England have produced the NHS clinical waste strategy. So this is something that we are working towards. And again, I mean, whilst there is some waste, as you can see in there, is a step towards the reduction of the waste. Um, Solving the puzzle. So waste segregation. As I've mentioned earlier, through the Venn diagram, so it looks complicated, but isn't. So this, what you see on screen, is part of the COVID-19 SOP that was produced back in 2020. Is now version 6 nationally of this SOP, but I thought just present this to you guys so you can see the simplistic way of waste segregation. Whilst obviously COVID thankfully is a thing of the past, or may not be. Listening to the news, it appears that is another variant, but is not as problematic as it was. This gives you an idea of all the waste streams that we have, it goes from offensive waste right into confidential waste. And of course, we are working throughout the system to ensure that we all working in partnership have the same processes across all hospital sites. And as you may know, all 7 regions within England have their respective integrated care systems. Ourselves, be Bristol, North Somerset, and South Gloucester, we also have our integrated care system or integrated care board. So we've been working together in partnership on how we could develop the ICS Green Plan. I'm glad to say that the plan is going through formalities to be signed off, which is brilliant. And within that plan, we have our waste management plan and on how we can support reducing waste, not only across all the ICS, but beyond as well. And we are pushing ourselves with targets, for example, zero waste to landfill by 2025 across the system, the introduction of the NHS clinical waste strategy, which is again supports environmental benefits, but also financially is very supportive, because when we talk about the 2060, what that means is 20% of our waste goes into incineration, the other 20% goes into alternative treatment, and 60% goes into offensive waste, which is the cheapest of them all. Of course, that doesn't account for other waste like recycling and general waste, but it just gives you an idea around the targets that we would like to follow across the system. So what is NBT and UHBW are doing towards zero waste? So we very much guide ourselves not only through the HDMO 701, as I've mentioned earlier, but we also guide ourselves through the waste hierarchy. So it's a lot of work within the 2 organizations and across the system on how we can actually prevent waste coming in. So I actually, in future, I would be like to call waste, instead of waste manager, a resource manager, for example. Let's stop calling waste, because actually when we look at our waste, is a resource in every sense. So it's about actually working through the procurement systems and avoiding those wastes arising in first place. But then, going from 1 to 7 being the least favorable option, we are actually, and I'll touch on the subject a bit later on, we are actually working towards not having any waste to landfill. So we are going through a tendering process that we will be saying to our suppliers, if your waste in any way goes to a landfill, we are not interested to work with you. So we are also working towards understanding the composition of our wastes. It's quite important to understand what we actually are disposing of. And we, in fact, what you see there, I can actually share data with the group around audit that was done both at NBT and lately at UHBW around plastics. And it's quite important for us to see actually what is the composition of our wastes. And believe it or not, when we've done the audits at UHBW within the BRI, we found that there were 90 different manufacturers from 90 different countries. That's a lot, and these were only from 2 areas of the hospital. So as you can imagine, throughout the system, there is a lot of plastic that we want to avoid coming into our hospital settings, and that's the work that we are doing with our procurement system. So we already have various recyclable streams. They go from electronic waste to scrap metal to pallets, glass, confidential waste, which is also recycled. And believe it or not, most of those streams are collected for free, or we have some type of income coming into the trust. So it's on our best interests, and again, both environmentally and financially, to continue pursuing this. One of our biggest streams of recycle within the system is dry mix recycle. So all those items that you can see there can be disposed within. Of course, we're still working because each organization still have their different contractors, so they expect different items. So the idea is just to have one thing across the system. That's what we are working towards. So before the pandemic, we was recycling, for example, PVC masks. So we had this within theater areas, recovery areas across some of our hospitals. And we seen that was the start of the reduction of a lot of our plastic. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic came, we've lost this recycling stream. However, both NBT and UHBW are working with the University of Bath, working together to extend other recyclable schemes, which is absolutely brilliant. And again, as I always say, look, recycling is good, but it's not good enough. It is a good thing, but what we actually have to do is to reduce or remove the plastic. But meanwhile, if we can recycle as much plastic, the better. We are also working across the system in relation to moving from single-use sharps bins into a reusable sharp bin. So this is something that we already have within our Western hospitals, and we want to implement that within NBT and UHBW Bristol sites. Well, every site. So reusables, you can use that bin up to 500 times before the bin is then incinerated, which is a tremendous amount of time. And while as single use, we incinerate all that plastic as we go along. And as I mentioned, the idea is to get into a reusable system, so you give us that circularity as well. Other work that we've done and we want to extend across the system, so this was implemented down in Western, is the recycling of metal medical instruments, which has been a great initiative. And the reason being is the fact that we can recycle that metal. We no longer are sending this metal through incinerator. And if you would see again, I can share some pictures, because we have to do some audits to our contractors, and at the end of the incineration process, if you look at the metal is still intact. So majority of the times is not actually incinerated. So the best way to do is to introduce a recyclable system to avoid incineration. Other work that we are doing, so we're working with universities across Bristol on what I call the forgotten waste. What I mean by that, so most of us will know that during the pandemic, we had organizations throughout the system and throughout the NHS receiving goods, items, from PPE to, anything imaginable through the push system. However, once the pandemic finished, we were left with all these vast amounts of items, some of them out of date. So instead of disposing of that, we are working with universities so they use those products, so students will use them for education. So it works in a way that we no longer are disposing of that waste. The university is no longer procuring, and the students are using some of those materials for education, which is absolutely fantastic. It's not the best, of course, but is something towards zero waste. Another favorite of mine is the coffee cup recycle. You will see both in South Mead or coming into central of Bristol hospitals, coffee cups spread it out across hospital sites. But if you walk also into retail areas within the city center, for example, you will see these cups. And believe it or not, in accordance with Bristol Waste, which is the partner that we are working with, if we placed end-to-end the cups that has been produced across Bristol, we would go up the M42 whopping 7 times. That's a lot, and that's a lot of coffee and coffee cups that we are working towards removing from landfill or incineration. Another piece of work that we are doing is around the recycling of pens. And as you see there on the slide, so there are up to 23 million medical pens that end up incineration or landfill. That's a lot in it. But we actually, what I've seen a change is actually manufacturers are now working towards supporting finding a solution. So we're working with the manufacturer of these pens. I'm pretty certain that NBT already implemented this or are within the implementation time, and we are working with our pharmacy ourselves to implement this and to obviously remove those pens, as I've said, from landfill and incineration, going through a recycling methodology. We are also working on gloves off across the system. So this is about educating staff where we actually need gloves when we are in a clinical setting, when we are providing some treatment that we actually require those gloves. Working with other partner, we are working towards remanufacturing some of our medical equipment, and I wanted to leave some data there. This is just from a couple of hospitals within VHBW. The amount doesn't sound a lot, but actually, when we put all the system together, we can make a difference. And this comes up to one of my favorites. Absolutely love this system. So the work pit. So the work pit is a system that will allow staff to reuse items before purchasing anything. And so, for example, NBT have been using this system for longer time than UHBW, and you will see on the bottom two lines, you will see the data around how much cost savings we've made, but also how much waste was deviated from landfill. And I'm really proud to have led the introduction of the system into HBW alongside my colleague Natalia. But what we want to do as a system is just, extend. So how much can we introduce this across the system? How and it doesn't have to be only within healthcare organizations. We can go into schools, working with the council. It will give benefits to all of our ICS. So as I mentioned earlier around procurement, so the 5 R's of procurement should include refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, and finally recycle. So this is important methodology for organizations to follow and to ensure they can reduce waste and boost, of course, the efforts towards net zero. And of course, the most important thing that I see as a waste manager is working with procurement towards the introduction of the 5 Rs. So currently, UHBW and NBT are working in innovation procurement project. We've started some time ago. So this was a project that was funded by the European Commission around innovation procurement. So it's actually turning procurement upside down in a way. So instead of us writing a tender specification, we engaged with contractors, manufacturers to tell us actually how should we build a tender specification. And fortunately, we are working towards now the end of getting that tender specification signed off, which is absolutely brilliant. Almost there. So how can we support zero waste? You will see some of the messages that I've mentioned there. Create a step change in waste management to support circular material flow, reduce waste volumes, and I think this is quite important. And I know I've already mentioned around education. I think we must create elements of compulsory education for waste. So both NBTU, HBW until recently have been penalized quite heavily financially because of not segregating waste according to regulations. So however, we just need to push through that education program. Export zero waste and recyclables overseas. I think that's quite important. Many of us seen on TV, for example, those programs that we are sending recycle overseas, but actually end up on the sea, damaging our environment, and we just need to put our foot down. Increase environmental sounding recycle across all waste streams and across the system. So that goes back, as I've mentioned, around the work pit. How can we work across the system to implement? So if I work at NBT, I can have access to the system and to any items that the council may have, and I can use like desks, chairs, etc. Minimize waste volumes, guarantee zero waste disposal to landfill by 2025. Move waste further up the waste hierarchy, increase reuse. So going back to the 5 Rs, increase education, as I mentioned, eliminate harmful environmental effects, reduce air pollution, reduce waste contaminated. And I just gonna bang around the correct waste segregation. I think this is one of the biggest risks across the system is the contamination of those waste streams. But again, look, we are at hand. If you contact us, we're more than happy to support you. There is some information on screen how you can contact us. I myself more than happy to go up at NBT or across the system, to be honest. Work with our waste manager colleague there and just support everyone across in relation to waste management. And that's me done.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Joe. That was really interesting. Thank you very much. So yeah, I was one thing I was just going to mention as well is the waste policy that's brand new to NBT and how we're trying to align that across both of our trusts, as you recognise that staff are moving between the two trusts. So yeah, if anyone wants to check that out, that's out on our link staff intranet page. And yeah, I think UHBW's is coming soon, isn't it?
Yep.
So yeah, fab. But yeah, I don't know if anyone had any questions for Joe. Yeah, Georgina.
Yeah, the thing on the previous slide about zero waste going to landfill. I work in pathology, in the infection science department, and we are bound by very strict health and safety regulations by the health and safety executive about how we dispose of our waste. So, all of our stuff either needs to be incinerated or it needs to be autoclaved, then incinerated, and what you've got left, you couldn't recycle. Because it's plastic and agar and bacteria that have been killed and all this sort of thing. So there's nowhere else for it to go but to landfill, really. So I don't know how you can say, I don't know what you'd say to that.
It is a great point, Georgina, and I know that there are some elements like mercury, for example, that there are at the moment no other ways than. I just realized I don't have my camera on. That's there. There are no other ways other than landfill. However, what we're trying to do is pushing everyone to make sure that we have those solutions. So, for example, for those items within pathology, all what is left over can go into a cement kiln, for example, and everything is burned. It can go into a municipal incinerator after all the bacteria is burned, etc., which then creates energy to the grid. And I know both NBT and UHBW general waste, for example, just to give you an example, goes into the Avonmouth plant, which is creating energy to the Bristol grid. However, for myself, whilst that's fantastic, we're removing waste from landfill, is still not good enough because you're still creating those emissions from incineration. So, and it's about, as I've said, Georgina, is a really good point, and what we want to do is to push everyone actually towards that target.
Yeah, because I would say, as a conservative estimate, 80% of our waste is highly hazardous. So, because obviously we're actively handling pathogens, so we have to be incredibly careful with what we recycle and how we do it.
Absolutely.
Before the pandemic, we used to be able to send certain plastic items to the scrap store, but that stopped when COVID came around, and these were things that we checked and they couldn't go in the dry mixed recycling. So is the scrap store back up and running, or is there any movement on where we could dispose of things like that rather than just throw them away?
Our theatres team do the same thing, and they've started to send their plastics to the scrap store again. So I can find out who that contact is if you want.
Yes,
I'm assuming
yes,
it's the same person that you deal with. Yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Georgina. Well, if there's any more questions, you're more than welcome to email them over to Joe or me, and we can answer them over email. Well, thanks very much for your time today, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks all.